Dr. Jazz.
But
Dr. Jazz.
yeah, Phil, I'll just jump in. I mean, you've been such an important part of the improvising scene, and I've listened to your music for such a long time, and I just wanted to ask you first in the beginning about John Russell, and you guys had such a long connection.
Did you see we had a tribute?
Yeah,
we had a tribute for him.
And I wanted to ask you about that actually.
Wednesday, I think it was.
Yeah. How was that? And I mean,
it was amazing. It was a full house at Cafe Oto. Amazing energy and commitment from the musicians, and I mean, I kind of curated the whole evening. In that I chose the groups, but there were a few suggestions from some of the more experienced members, which I took on board, and they were all good. But it was an incredible evening, yeah. So it was. I'm glad I did it, and thank you to Fielding Hope at Cafe Oto for booking the night for us.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Sorry, did you want to know where when I started working with John?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I know you had a trio with John Butcher, of course. I mean, probably one of the longest working trios, almost, I guess. But
maybe not actually, but thinking of some of the other groups, but. I mean, it did proceed with a different trio. So I started playing with John in, I think it was 1979.
Wow, already.
And there was Mark Pickworth on soprano saxophone. Who for a long time hasn't been part of the scene, but so John Butcher joined in or replaced Mark Mark left, and John became the new saxophone player in 1984.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And then 3 years later we released our first album.
Yeah, I mean, but you were definitely, when I talked to John Butcher like the other day, like a month ago or something.
Yeah.
And I think especially your trio brought quite a fresh breeze in the improvising scene in the mid 80s. I don't know, what's your view on that? I mean, when I hear what you guys started doing.
Well, if you're
involved
in some ways, but it could be argued that we were carrying on from maybe John Stevens' SME type style, but maybe with a much more classical in terms of material, so contemporary classical, which was kind of reflected from Tony Oxley's explorations. But yeah, I remember when we played at Nickelsdorf Festival in the 90s, I think it was. Was it late 80s even? I don't know. We were very scared because that was associated with free jazz, and we certainly were not playing free jazz, but we went down well. So yeah, that was fine. Actually, I think we played News from the Shed first at Nickelsdorf, and then the trio later. But so News from the Shed it had myself and the two Johns but I played some electronics with the violin, so to make it different from the trio. And Paul Lovens and Radu Malfatti were in the group. And that was it. That was it. I mean, Radu had been part of the English scene for a long time, and he was. I mean, yes, he was associated with free jazz with 9 Cents and Elton Dean's 9 Cents, but I never saw this group, but he did have a trio with Phil Waxman and Paul Litton.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Wow.
No, I don't think it's. I remember Phil Waxman talking about it because he used to run free improv workshops at City Lit, which is a university. They've also had evening classes. And whilst I was at London College of Music, I went there. So he talked about this trio. So Radu was getting it, when he was in London, he was moving towards a more free improv approach, but it kind of got more serious as he got into Lackerman and then Cage, obviously.
Yeah. Like,
I mean, the trio was, because it could be argued that its vocabulary was from a much more contemporary classical area, was quite in some ways was quite fresh, and became influential on some of the younger musicians like Mark Weston and Rodri Davis, Anne Hara Davis, Matt Davis.
No, I mean,
Fell.
it is a continuation, like you said, of what was happening already in the 70s with John and Stevens's. But like, I don't know, it's something with that trio, and maybe also how John Butcher approached it, and John Russell also, for me, like when we speak of the UK improvising guitar scene, everyone mentions Derek Bailey, obviously, but I think he's still such an underrated player. John Russell, like, in a wider sense, like really almost an unknown to maybe a wider audience, which
perhaps, but then so it could be argued so am I. But
I mean, he was so good. Like, really, when I listened to his stuff, man, he was amazing, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't. Helen Petts uploaded a video in the last. It's filmed where he was brought up in Romney Marsh, so you got some of the local area. But she's put one of his tracks, and it's an incredible track. I mean, and it's that kind of his playing that I think it's more influential on me now than his other side, where he's having to cut through the mix and stuff like that. But yeah, wonderful.
Yeah,
I think I mean, it's great that there's so many videos on the Mopo Moso YouTube channel where people can see exactly how good he was. Still,
it's always this. Yeah. But you mentioned London, and what was it like? I guess in the mid 70s or early 70s that I know you studied violin, right? And piano,
I mean, I studied
classical, right?
I mean, I did start improvising in my teens. First of all, it was, I suppose, blues. I mean, I could work out.
Oh, really? Okay.
Seriously. I could work it. It was easy to work out the chords, and I had, because I was getting music theory, and I had good ears. And then, so then I discovered the Mahavishnu Orchestra.
Oh, wow, Jerry Goodman, really?
Yeah. And Melody Maker mentioned the J word, said it was jazz rock. So I thought, okay, so this is jazz, so it can't be all that bad. So I then started going back you know,
Mm.
so Miles Davis, Coltrane, and I started listening to jazz on the radio,
Oh, yeah.
big BBC Three, Radio 3, and there was Charles Fox's contemporary jazz thing, but also more traditional ones. And Melody Maker actually had a really good record review in those days. So there was Steve Lake, who later he worked at ECM.
ECM, yeah.
And Richard Williams both wrote for Melody Maker, and both of them reviewed improvised music. So I was aware of improvised music at quite a relatively early age, and then I went in 1976, so I was 19. I went to the Barry Summer School, which Tony Oxley was the organizer.
Okay.
And I actually went there to improve my jazz violin playing. But and the only Henry Lowther was there, trumpet player.
Oh, really?
But
I love Henry.
There were me and he played violin as well. But so me and David Bourne, who subsequently ended up on the February Papers album, we went to him and sort of said, "Well, we're violinists. Would you be interested in helping?" And he said, "I'm sorry, I'm concentrating with trumpet players, but if you go," and he literally pointed down the hill, "you'll find the improvisers," and Phil Waxman was there.
Okay.
So
how cool.
My baptism playing free improvised music was a quartet with David Bourne, another violinist, Phil Waxman, and Barry Guy.
Whoa. That's
and because I'd heard some of Charles Fox's programs, and I'd kind of I studied Anton Webern's Concerto for nine instruments for A level, so I was aware of that kind of vocabulary. So I basically fitted in very quickly, and it was like it was a major moment where, okay, this is what I want to play. Yeah. So that was when I was 19.
Was it heavy for you as a
I
classical
went back
player?
in.
I mean, just
Sorry?
when you play classical repertoire, you kind of reinterpret or play what is written, but like here you had to open your ears and listen. Was that
sure? But I was aware of some of the contemporary classical by listening to it.
Okay.
Vocabulary and just trying out. You listening to something and trying it out on the violin and understanding that, noise techniques and harmonics and whatever. So so it was a major moment in my life when I was only 19, and I went back. I mean, I was studying at the London College of Music at that time. So Phil Waxman mentioned his workshop, so I started going to Phil's workshops. And I went back to the Barry Summer School in 77 and 78. And I think the last year is when I had the whole of the second week was just playing with Derek Bailey, Hugh Metcalf, and a drummer called Will Evans, which was quite an amazing second week. And Derek annoyed everyone else on the all the other tutors because he just wanted to play with us and didn't want to do the stuff he was meant to do. But then
how was
that's
it like
Derek
for you?
For you.
How was it like for you to play with
Fantastic.
Derek? Yeah?
Well, yeah, because I was with Derek every day, and then we did a gig in London, and we agreed to meet Derek outside a toy shop in a road near a Teatro Technis near King's Cross, and whilst we were waiting for Derek, this guy came up and said, "Oh, I see you've got instruments. Are you playing tonight? And we said, yeah, we're playing up the road at Teatro Tetris. And he said, oh, I'm going to that gig. And he looked at me and said, you're too young to be an improviser. And it was Adam Bowman. You know Adam Bowman?
No.
Yeah, it was Adam Bowman. Oh, you don't? Okay,
No.
the Adam is okay. He's
I don't know. Sure.
he's kind of like an outsider art, I suppose. But he plays amplified objects
Okay.
and stuff like. He's not on social media, but he's
London. Okay.
he does quite a lot of gigs and tours Europe, and I mean he's with the Bowman brothers, Jonathan,
Okay.
and Secluded Bronte, so he's quite well known. Anyway, but yeah, he accused me of being I mean, I did look very young in those days.
But when was then the story?
Yeah, so I sorry.
Yeah. Well, how did you then hook up with John? Like that was in London or with Russell?
Okay, yeah. Oh, John Russell. I think I can't actually remember how he must have heard that I was on the scene. Maybe he came to a gig I did, because I started putting on gigs at the London Musicians Collective in Gloucester Avenue. So I don't know if he came to one of the gigs or if other people that came to the gig started talking about this violinist Phil Durrant. Mate, I mean, I did. I mean, the second generation did run a whole bunch of gigs, actually in theatre in Cheney Street off Tottenham Court Road. They did some lunchtime concerts, and I went to them because it wasn't that far from the London College of Music. So I did see John Russell. So maybe we talked. I don't know. Maybe we talked at because Derek Bailey used to organise gigs at Soho Theatre. Maybe we talked there. But anyway, I subsequently started playing with John.
Yeah.
And maybe I recommended Mark Pickworth. And anyway, John Butcher, I met John Butcher because Phil Waxman also used to do workshops at West Square. It's not Goldsmiths. Maybe it is Gold. But anyway, around the Elephant and Castle, there was spaces for. I think there was a studio, but Phil used to. These were on Saturdays, and that's where I met John Butcher. So I recommended when Mark Pickworth announced he was leaving. I recommended John Butcher to John Russell.
Interesting. But you mentioned all these places now. You know, Derek Bailey was running something, and Phil Waxman was running something. Like, you know, when I talk to like John Butcher and all these guys that are part of your generation, it seems the scene was really alive. Like a lot of things happening in London back then, like for the improvised scene. Or
I mean, yes, we were lucky. We were lucky that there was, Phil Waxman running his City Lit workshops, and also the West Square thing that was happening on Saturdays. I mean, Derek's things were just gigs. So but there was the Soho Theatre, which was a lovely small theatre in the back streets off Tottenham Court, off Oxford Street, actually, sort of around Tottenham Court Road. Soho Poly, that's what it was. I mean, and then of course the London Musicians Collective started, but the London Musicians Collective started because there were no venues to play, so it wasn't. I mean, yes, there were a few pub venues, but there was a time. There was a time when there wasn't much yeah, the scene kind of wanted a regular venue, so the London Musicians Collective was very important for the scene. But I mean, the London scene at the moment is very lively. I think
now it's amazing. Yeah, now it's
quite incredible. A lot of
yeah.
There are a number of venues, but also people like Rick Jensen putting on his Skronk nights is a very important night for people that want to dip their toe in improvised music. But he's created an amazing community spirit up in North London. There, I mean, I when I started playing the mandolin in 2017, I went there to work out how to use it in an improvisation context. I didn't want to just start doing gigs without.
How did you decide to why did you decide for the mandolin? I think it's the same tuning as violin.
To play the mandolin.
Yeah. Or it's slightly different.
It's yeah, that's part of it, but a major part. Okay, folk rock band Fairport Convention.
Yeah.
They Swarbrick, the violinist who I love, he doubled on mandolin in that band, so that's where I first heard mandolin.
Oh, okay.
And for years and years and years, I said when I'm 60, my major present, I want it to be a mandolin.
Okay.
And that didn't change. So my wife and a couple of friends clubbed together, and I got an Epiphone semi-acoustic.
I have the same one, the Epiphone one.
I mean, originally, yeah. So it's quite a nice instrument. I mean, originally what I thought I would do is, I mean, originally it was if I was on a computer and you got the spinning ball, I thought, okay, the mandolin was quicker to put over my head and just play rather than getting the violin out and you know. But I must admit, I was losing interest in the violin anyway, and I was kind of thinking about stopping.
How come?
But I kind of stopped playing it, and what I wanted practicing, I mean, and what I wanted to actually do on the violin was getting more and more narrow each year. So because of I suppose the lowercase near silence scene, where I completely changed my violin playing anyway. What I wanted to actually do on it was more and more narrow on that scene, and I kind of felt, well, there's Anne Harrod Davis and Jennifer Allen, what they're doing on the violin is so good. I don't need to be playing violin on the scene. But also I was getting much more interested in because since 1999 is when I bought my Pismo MacBook. I got into using Reactor software. I got more and more interested in electronics, so I was doing a lot of stuff with electronics and finding it much more rewarding and fun to play than the violin, which I was finding wasn't fun anymore.
Interesting.
And I sort of vowed, okay, if I go with a whole year where I don't get invited to do a violin gig and I don't ask to do a violin gig, I'll stop anyway. And inevitably 10 months after that date, or 11 months after that date, someone would ask me to do a project which was interesting enough to actually agree to do it. But I mean, last violin gig was a nice one to go out with. Burkhard Beins came to London and he wanted to do a trio with me and Anne Harrod, and he just played snare drum and objects, and we played violin, and it was a very enjoyable gig. The Cafe Otto project space, not the main venue, but that was it, and I said no more.
Interesting.
So
you find it
so
exciting?
that was 2018.
On the mandolin
Sorry?
now? You find it exciting now on the mandolin, like discovering new
Yeah,
sonic
yeah, and
possibilities and stuff?
Well, also, I'm much more willing to play any kind of area of improvised music on the mandolin.
Interesting.
So, which I wasn't with the violin. So, to be honest, I mean, the style of music that the trio with John and John explored, I became very bored with on the violin.
Yeah,
that kind of style, and at the end of the life with the trio, we would do possibly one gig a year at Mopomoso, and to be honest, I began to feel like I was a performing seal because there would be the same three guys in the front row that were there every time we played, and it was like, oh, the trio, you know. And so I left, you know, I left the trio anyway.
Yeah.
But because I thought this is ridiculous, one gig a year,
yeah,
and often just 15 minutes at the end of the concert. So that was it. But yeah, with the mandolin, I'm happy to play all kinds of scenarios.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, it's kind of reinvigorated the fun aspect of playing improvised music, and less of the kind of purist, oh, I don't want to play that area, you know, which I kind of got into with it. I think when I got into the lowercase reductionist scene, it was very much, it was making a statement about what we wanted to do, and which in some ways was the same as when the trio came on the scene. We were making a statement. This is what we're doing. We're not playing free jazz. We're playing improvised music with a heavy contemporary classical influence.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you to make a statement, you kind of have rules about what you don't play.
True. Yeah. Sure. Enough. Yeah.
Whereas as a mandolinist, I don't have any rules about what I don't play. I play what is appropriate to the situation.
Yeah.
So recently, as an example, I had a really good Christoph Gallio. Do you know the Swiss saxophone player Christoph Gallio?
No.
Okay, yeah, he's another very, very, very underrated player.
But
anyway, so he got a residency to come to London. I mean, we actually met in the 1980s, and when I was in late 80s, early 90s, when I was in Switzerland doing projects, and we got on very well then. And then until recently, he had about 6 months in London residency, so we played, and that was very enjoyable. But we both agreed that in some ways we could touch on all the styles of improvised music, from very sparse to free jazz to whatever, and it was very enjoyable. So I was playing with him. I was playing electric mandolin and with some electronics rather than the acoustic stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice to rekindle that joy, I think.
Enthusiasm, yeah.
Yeah.
Because there was a time when I think we all go through this, where we think what we're doing is kind of the way to go, and what other people are doing is not the way to go, and so we tend to not to play with other people because that's not what we're doing, and we become quite purist.
Yeah.
But it's all about getting deeper into the music. You kind of have to get curious to explore the nitty gritty. But I mean, another, talking to Mark Westel after lockdown, we both agreed that we were much more willing to try stuff that we hadn't tried before lockdown, and just enjoy playing with people, and not worry about making art, but actually enjoy playing. And if it's good, it's good. If it doesn't work, no worries.
Sure.
Yeah, but as long as you enjoy it, that's the main thing. So yeah,
that's so important. I mean, especially, but you have to become ripe to realize some of these things, I guess. And COVID helped, actually, with many people I talked to. They they came to certain conclusions about their playing or what they want to explore. I think it served us well.
Yeah.
But when you were younger, like in the beginning of the 80s, how did the generation before you accept you, like, getting gigs and like John Stevens, let's say, or Bailey or Evan Parker for that? I mean, I know you played with Evan later. I love that Strings album you guys did, but like, how was that for you in the beginning?
Okay, well, I'll bring back Tony Oxley, because Tony Oxley had this thing about generations, and according to Tony Oxley, I was in the third generation, and he said, you guys are all right, but that second generation lot, I won't use any expletives, but they were there. What he hated about the second generation was that they weren't afraid to bring their love of certain kinds of music, and actually a lot of that music was black music, so reggae, soul, whatever. And one of the most important bands, there were two bands I used to go to see regularly. One was Alterations, so that's Steve Beresford, David Toop, Peter Cusack, Terry Day, and the other one was Chamber Pop, which was Phil Waxman, Richard Bezic, and Tony Wren. And Chamber Pop were a bit like the trio, especially, so they were quite they were playing, so Richard Bezic was playing oboe and Tony Wren double bass. Oh, and there was a clarinet player, Simon Mayo, and they were also playing improvised music with a heavy contemporary classical. Pain. But Chamber Pop evolved because Richard Bezic got into punk and then bought an electric guitar and started playing it through the same effects that he was playing his oboe through. And they got more and more electronic, but it was quite interesting for me to listen to this. But at the same time, I would go and see Alterations, who would launch into a kind of dub reggae rhythm and all kinds of world music influences. Anyway, Tony Oxley hated all that because it was rhythm and it was melody, But the third generation was kind of taking on board the aesthetic of the first generation, especially the Stevens Bailey thing, and going with it. So we were kind of accepted by maybe the first generation people, and so we were okay. They were happy because we were kind of, oh, okay, they're doing our stuff and exploring it. they're okay. They're not bringing back rhythm and melody.
Okay. Wow. Interesting.
Yeah. But I mean, Derek was fine with us, with some of the second generation people. I mean, in 1984, I did Company Week, and Bill Laswell was meant to do it. And he phoned up Derek and said, "I'm sorry, I can't do it because Mick Jagger has asked me to produce his album." Seriously. And and so Steve Beresford was the replacement. And so, you know, Derek was happy, and then Steve Beresford subsequently did quite a few Company Weeks.
Yeah.
And it was quite controversial with some of the other musicians that Derek invited. But then Derek played with Misha Mendelberg and Han Bennick, who used rhythm and
Exactly. Yeah.
obvious. So Derek was quite happy to play with musicians that were still exploring vocabulary that was traditional, whereas Tony Oxley wouldn't go any. Although Tony Oxley was doing jazz gigs. I mean, so it was slightly. But when it came to improvised music, he was very narrow in what, or very particular in focus in what he would do and what he wouldn't do. So, I mean, John Russell was slightly different from the second generation, that he did concentrate on a more kind of angular vocabulary that wasn't overtly influenced by. I mean, his background was as a rock musician. So I always thought that one of the biggest differences between John and Derek was that Derek's rhythms would be kind of swung eights, whereas John's were more straight eights from a rock. Yeah, and you can kind of hear it in when they do
how they attack, the
chordal thing.
Yeah.
But yeah. So maybe that was why John gravitated to playing with me, because not a lot of the other second generation players were kind of exploring that way of playing, because they were borrowing more overtly from sort of indie rock and experimental rock and jazz, reggae, soul and stuff like that. I mean, even someone like Nigel Coombs, who would explore kind of a more melodic neoclassical approach to playing the violin rather than a more Ligeti, Webern, angular approach.
Oh, so also about your, you mentioned Reactor and, your exploration of the sound design, which started like more than, 1999, you said, like, but when did you first start digging into electronics? What caught your interest initially? I mean, when was that moment?
I mean, it was an extension of playing with violin electronics. I mean, so when I went to the Barry Summer School, Tony Oxley was using electronics. He had his metal frame. He had a frame with knives and cymbals and springs and egg slicers, and he was using a ring modulator, compressor, and an octave divider. Phil Waxman was also using electronics sometimes. Barry Guy was using I mean, I did take I had a guitar amp with me, so I could plug my violin through an amp. So just extending the sound of the violin with amplification and how that altered the sound. And then slowly but surely I started adding stuff. So I had a Boss, still have it, Boss DE200 delay, and a tape Avco as well. And it kind of, and then slowly but surely I started adding Yamaha SPX90, which had pitch shift as well. So I mean, I slowly but sure, I mean, the news from the shed, the electronics is kind of enhances the sound of the violin. So it's kind of quite subtle in how I integrate it. But then I started working with Sarah Gale Brand trombonist, Pat Thomas piano and electronics, and Mark Sanders. And in that group, the electronics kind of became more dominant. So I would quite often I would literally have the violin tucked under, you know, and I'd scratch the string and then move the faders, and so that became more and more. The electronics were much more in focus, and then that rig, with John Butcher doing the, you know, the where I would do live transformations of his sound. So and obviously that I was just playing electronics with that, but he was the input. And then also Mimeo, music and movement. Do you know Mimeo? Yeah. So with that, I think maybe the first gig I did with them, I think I might have had the violin and electronics, but very quickly I started. I had a couple of small samplers, so if so I would, if I used I would, but I was also using kind of feedback as well in that system. I mean, with John Butcher I often used feedback as a input, so it wasn't just him, it was feedback. In fact, it was easier to work in a more church-like acoustic in some ways, because it was easier to get the feedback as opposed to a dry room. So the electronics kind of did start taking over, and then I got fed up with carting a whole load of stuff around. And when I read about Reactor in one of the music technology magazines, because at the same time I had a small studio, so I was kind of doing electronic music. I mean, in the late 80s and early 90s, I did techno and
I've read that. What was that?
Breakbeat.
Yeah. Where does this come from?
I just listening to John Peel. Do you know the English DJ? John Peel was okay. He's long dead, but for a number of years. I mean, he was one of the first people that introduced punk music to the masses. But before punk, he would play progressive rock. And then he started playing rock, but he played traditional English folk music. So, you know, for instance, he played Dave Swarbrick when he played with Martin Carthy. You know, so he played dub reggae, and he was playing more experimental indie stuff. So he played The Fall and but he also started playing techno music, so from Detroit, and so I was hearing it, Derek May, Juan Atkins and Kevin Saunderson, and I felt that their use of electronics reached me a lot more than the I was listening to electronic music from the contemporary classical scene,
Yeah.
but I found it problematic. I didn't like the sounds. I didn't like the way they bathed the sounds in reverb, and I kind of felt it wasn't rigorous enough in that they weren't really exploring the sounds. Whereas some improvisers like Phil Waxman, who explored electronics, were rigorous in their working of the electronics. And I kind of felt that the Detroit techno people were equally rigorous, and I just really gravitated towards how they were programming the synths and stuff like that. So I began to love the music and started exploring it.
Interesting.
And I initially thought it was a way of maybe I'd make more money. I didn't want to stop playing improvised music, but I wanted a way of financing playing improvised music. But ironically, I still earned more money playing festivals and whatever with improvised music than I ever did doing the dance music.
Yeah.
Basically, because I was continually being ripped off. I mean, so, but it was fun. I mean, you know, I met Smiley and PJ from Shut Up and Dance, who were an incredibly influential bunch of people for drum and bass eventually, but they were real characters. So you know, I for a while it was good fun to play. I mean, it was quite controversial with some of the musicians on the improv scene.
Oh, sure, I can imagine.
But then, you know,
talking with Tony Oxley about that, right?
Well, by that time, Tony Oxley had moved out of the country, so he.
No, just kidding.
I mean, I remember doing I did a tour of England with News from the Shed, and Radu asked me to put on a tape. I had a tape in the car, so I did put on a tape. You know, he was quite big. He's trying to be respectful or something, but I don't think he liked it. But I mean, it's been an important part of my background, because it meant that, for instance, you know, for the last 12 years or whatever it is, I've been doing part-time lecturing at Solent University in Southampton, and you know, I lecture in music technology. So without learning how to use it and making that kind of music, I couldn't relate to the young people.
Interesting.
But and it did. I don't know. Yeah. So I just explored it because I liked their use of electronics as opposed to some of the contemporary classical people.
Yeah, and definitely was a base for you to start using Reactor and, you know, software, I guess, later when it became more.
So thank you for. Yeah, when I read that Reactor was kind of like a rack mounted, you know, you had modules that were, and you built things that could be relate to a rack in a studio, you know. Plus it was one of the earliest softwares that explored granular resynthesis. So and, you know, I have to say, the sound from Reactor's granular stuff was superior to Mac's MSP. I thought, and I kind of rejected Mac's MSP because it was academic, you know, and whereas Reactor was more coming from a experimental electronic scene that was more associated with left field techno and whatever, and I kind of like that sort of sort of anti-academia approach, but it's kind of interesting because academia has actually looked down upon reactor over the years. I mean, I'm lucky in that I persuaded Solent University to well, they were quite happy. They use the whole complete software, so including reactor. So they do have reactor at Solent, which is good.
Interesting.
But I no longer use a laptop in a live situation.
Ah, well, what's your setup now usually? I mean, besides the mandolin, I guess, like usually when you
Well, the mandolin
it's
is quite separate, so I never do a gig where I do. Well, I do gigs now with mandolin and pedals.
Yeah.
So sometimes those pedals, like I've got a ring modulation, so it's going back to the influence of Tony Oxley, and a sort of glitchy delay, Red Panda Tensor. So I mean, I use those two pedals with the electric mandolin. I also have been doing amplified objects sort of thing. So like springs and egg slicer. So it's going harking back to Hugh Davis and Tony Oxley, and of course David Tudor. And some would argue Adam Bowman, because he uses springs and amplified objects as well. But I think my use of them is more connected with Hugh Davis and Tony Oxley than the way he uses them. So I have I also got a dulcimer stick, which is I suppose that it means I can place it on the table and do a key throw, stuff. So there's the amplified objects dulcimer stick thing. Then there's a purely semi-modular. I mean, I did actually in 2016, my wife bought me a Moog Mother 32. But I did actually, in 1999, I bought a Dupfer A100 modular rack. But I never took that outside the house because it's very heavy. But what I did do was create samples that at first I put in my small samplers that I use with Mimeo, but later I put them in the reactor software. I built my own kind of, slowly but surely, I built my own
library
for gigs. Yeah. So well, I kind of glued together various modules, so it became my personal instrument. But yes, I could load in samples, and the samples were all things that I had created. So, and some of those samples were from my Dupfer modular rig. So in 2016, when my wife bought me this, the idea was that I'd integrate some modules from the Dupfer rack into using with them. But of course, I ended up buying a whole load of new stuff because it becomes addictive.
Of course.
And I did do, I did do some. So I did some gigs. I don't know if you know anything much about the modular scene, but there are things called modular meets.
Okay. No.
Where you just come along and you all set up your setups and sort of get excited by someone else's setup and make a racket. And sometimes there are there are sets as part of the. So I did a few modular meets and solos. So I mean, some of those. Actually, there's on YouTube. There's Brighton
from Brighton. I saw that from Brighton.
Recorded it. Yeah. So that was part of that whole scene.
Interesting.
Peter Rayberg. Do you know Peter Rayberg? No. Mago Records. Okay, he's in Mimeo. Was in Mimeo. He died a couple of years ago, but he turned up there. And I did some gigs with Mark Westell's The Scene, playing modular. But then, I mean, I bought another Moog thing, a DFAM, which actually stands for Drummer from Another Mother. And I bought a Make Noise O Coast, or you can call it Zero Coast, O Coast, No Coast. You're allowed to call it any of those. And now my rig, if I do a so-called, it's semi-modular. So I'm if the purest modular people would look down on me because I'm not using a modular rig, but I'm using two separate modules. I only occasionally even connect them, That's but so I do gigs with that setup.
Okay.
Sometimes. I mean, there's a solo modular album that was released on Linear Obsessional, but the label is no longer kind of running. So, but I think if you Google,
okay,
it's under my alias Sawari Modular.
Okay, I'll check it out. I don't know.
Yeah. So yeah, and there's a duo album with Bill Thompson, who plays Moog guitar and electronics.
Yeah, you really evolved.
Yeah, and I mean I got very into concepts, I mean Eliane Radig. So I mean you can hear that on the duo album with Bill Thompson, which is very kind of long tones with tiny changes.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
But the stuff with them, I mean, I also can interact in a more moment to moment fashion with the electronics.
Yeah, that's important.
Which is why I just concentrate. Why I just concentrate on the O Coast and the DFAM, because with those, it's possible to kind of interact very quickly, and although both of them are great for drones, actually, but so yeah. Now I'm integrating some of those two pedals that I mentioned into that setup as well.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
But yeah, it's just another cash cow, or another cash disappearing as you buy more pedals.
Yeah.
But it's fun.
Oh, it is, man! It's incredible fun. It is. Yeah. But Phil, otherwise, what's on the schedule for you for this year? Like, are you doing some tours or festivals in Europe? I mean, on the continent, or some projects, or?
Well, there's some plans. Before Christmas, I toured with guitarist Francesca Niaba.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah, it's something. Yeah.
And Harold Kimmig, Alfred Zimmerman, and Daniel Studer. And I played that setup I just described, the O Coast and the Moog DFAM. And that we had a fantastic time, both musically and socially, which is always important.
Yeah, of course, definitely.
So we are trying for some festivals, applying. I'm still working with Bertrand, Denzler, and Burkhard Beins in Trio Sawari.
Oh, beautiful! Oh, fantastic.
So hopefully there'll be some festivals and whatever with that. in 2024 it'll be our 20th anniversary.
Oh.
So anyone who sees this,
Yeah, shout it out, shout it out now. Yeah,
it's a gig. We can do it. I did some recording, going back to the acoustic side of my mandolin playing. I have a larger one, octave mandola. So I did some recording with Maggie Nichols and a young Norwegian drummer called Emil Carlsen, who lives in Leeds in UK. And I think probably by the time people see this, it will be online. But Maggie Nichols is celebrating her 75th birthday the end of February, and to celebrate that, there's going to be a concert at Cafe Otto in London, and the trio with me and Emil is part of that concert.
Oh, fantastic.
So and we actually did some recording. We need to finalize the best tracks. There's too much to choose from. But I mean, in terms of recording, I also did a duo recording with Daniel Thompson, who's a very good guitarist in London. I also played octave mandola. I did some recording with Christoph Gallio, that
you mentioned,
Swiss saxophone player, where I played electric mandolin and electronics. There's a couple of trios that I started last year. One with pianist Marjolaine Charbin and vibraphone and electronics Jackie Waldock, and we've done a couple of gigs together, and we're also involved in a larger project. But we're definitely going to do some recording, and then in my career, I've hardly ever done trios with a double bass and drums.
Yeah, funny. Yeah,
I know. But last year I started working with Ollie Bryce, double bass player, and Andrew Lyle, who's a fantastic drummer. He's come on the scene in the last few years, but he's based in London. But he's very interesting in his kind of polyrhythmic metric style. He's got deep into it, so he's great fun to play. So we've got a trio, and we've done 2 gigs already, and we got another one coming up. I continued to do lots of projects with Mark Westel. Including one of the projects is to do with the English painter Scottish actually, Alan Davey, who was very famous in the early 60s.
Oh yeah, I saw you did that with Steve also with Beresford, right? He's in
yes, right. Steve Beresford and Davey too.
I saw that.
We played at the Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival last year, and we're playing February 2nd, which happens to be my birthday, but coincidentally at Cafe Otto. So we're doing that Cafe Otto. There's also I suppose it's been going for a few years, in fact since 2017, duo with Martin Vishnik, who plays nylon string acoustic guitar.
Really? Oh wow, I have to check it out. Wow.
Yeah, there's an album on Confront. Okay,
I have to find it. Oh, it sounds
yeah. So it's on Bandcamp now, so you can listen to it.
Okay.
And we'll be recording our 2nd album this year. So this year I aim to record more albums.
Still busy, man. Well, that's
still busy. Yeah, I mean, last year I did. I probably organised a few things, because Christoph Gallio was not the only Swiss player to be doing a residency in London. There's also Gaudence Badger. In fact, I'm doing a gig with him and Mark Weston and Marjolaine Charbin tonight. This we're talking about January the 21st. So it would have finished by the time this gets out. But I organised a few things because of Gowden's, which maybe I wouldn't have done, you know. So there were gigs that I organised because of necessity in some ways, or because opportunities that arose, and him being in, he spent 3 month periods in London, so and it's been great having him in London, also Christoph before, and then there was Christian Muller, another Swiss musician, was in London last year, so it's been very invaluable for the London scene to have these different musicians being in London for a few months, you know.
Beautiful.
So there's a few things in the pipeline.
Yeah, man, that's not a few. That's quite a lot, actually. That's fantastic, man. Fantastic, beautiful, cool, great, Phil. I mean, I'll leave you be on the 21st of January, a nice Saturday, to enjoy the rest of the afternoon and and then have a nice gig in the evening. So but thanks for sharing some of this stuff, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. I enjoyed it.
To hear you talk about, you know.
Yeah.